Hey everybody, welcome to another episode. In this edition, I sit down with Dr. Chris Gilmer. He is the president of West Virginia University at Parkersburg. He's been there about a year, a little over a year, a full academic year. So I sit down with him, we talk about that, we talk about his roots in Mississippi, his journey to his presidency here in Parkersburg, a little bit about Southern food as well. And kind of what's new out there at WVUP. It's a conversation you're really going to enjoy. So tell me about what it was like growing up in rural Mississippi.
Well, my favorite line from literature is the opening to Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, when he says it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. A lot of people may have thought it was the worst of times, but to be honest with you, it was pretty much only the best of times for me. I'm one of the few people I've ever known who could say that I really did grow up on the road to Damascus. I don't compare myself to the Apostle Paul in any way, but if you were at my grandmother's house on Sunday morning, it was not a conversation about whether you were going to get up and go to the Damascus Primitive Baptist Church or not. It was just going to happen. And the little road that they lived on passed through the community of Damascus that didn't have a store, didn't have a post office, didn't have much of anything except that church. And probably the happiest days of my childhood were spent there on that little farm. But before getting to that farm, the singer-songwriter Jules says that we're the accumulation of the dreams of generations, and that's what I am. A lot of people dream that I would have a moment to do the things that I get to do now, and they paid a pretty big sacrifice for me to do it. My mama was quite literally born on the kitchen table of a sharecropper's shack out in a field. Wow. Her family never owned the land that it farmed. She hangs on the wall in this office where we're sharing this time together today, and looks down on everything that I do from a portrait. And she basically sacrificed her whole life for her children. She had a full scholarship to go to East Central Community College, but she got me, and then fairly quickly after that, she got my sister instead. And much later in her life, in her 40s, after going back for like 7 years, she got to finish up that degree. And I was much prouder of hers, frankly, than I am of any of the ones that I have earned. My father's parents were slightly more prosperous. They owned that little farm I was telling you about on the road to Damascus, and they gave me a calf on the day that I was born. Not a baby blanket, not a rattle, not any of those things. They gave me a calf, and my grandfather, and later as I grew up, I tended it into a small herd of cattle. And when it got time for me to go to college, which was never even a conversation in my family about whether or not that was going to happen, I was always going to be the one and the first one to do that. He hitched up the trailer and drove those cows to market and sold them, and came home and unhitched the trailer, and we got in the truck and drove over to East Central Junior College then in Decatur, Mississippi. And he took me in, and he took basically all the money that he had in the world in with him, and he said to them, here's my boy, and I've done all in the world that I can do for him, and now I'm going to turn him over to you. And so I grew up with a strong religious background. I grew up in a family that really had nothing except a lot of love and the good name that it had earned in the community. And they basically sacrificed their whole life that I would have a moment like the one that I have today. I think which is why the motto of my life really is that to whom much is given, of that person is much required. So much was given to me by so many, and I just feel compelled to try to share it.
So your education, as you alluded to, started, and you did all of your education, higher education, in Mississippi, right? So take me through that journey.
Correct. Well, it was an interesting journey. When I went to the first grade at Forest Elementary School, I didn't realize that I was going to be, because children don't realize these things, in one of the first integrated classes that had ever been taught in that school. And all we knew is that we were a group of children. Some of us were black, some of us were white. We weren't in a place in life yet to understand the historical context of what was happening in that moment. But as I got older and I did realize it, I realized the historical significance. And I remember Mrs. Cowan, who was my first grade teacher, and she was an African American teacher. And this was the first time that she had taught white children in the segregated South. And I remember thinking to myself, what an incredibly brave woman Mrs. Cowan was, and all of the Mrs. Cowans who, in a fairly oppressive society, were having to deal with disciplining white children and things of that nature. So my educational journey was kind of a socio-political journey even before I realized that it was. And so I did go on to East Central Junior College, community college now, not very far from my home. I was a first generation college student. I I'd done really well in high school, and I tested into honors English and the lowest possible section of math, all on the same day. I was good at one thing and not very good at the other. And if I hadn't had the opportunity of a community college, I probably might have continued on and become the statistic that society kind of expected me to be. I needed to be close to my roots and close to the people that I knew and loved, and I needed to have an education that wasn't very expensive, and so I got that. And then I earned lots of scholarships along the way as well, and I went on to the University of Southern Mississippi and earned a degree that in journalism, which basically would provide a career for me then for a few years that would pay for me to go back to do my graduate studies. And so I went on to get a master's at Mississippi College and then a PhD at the University of Southern Mississippi as well. So that was my higher education journey. I knew I think fairly early that I would be a teacher of some kind. I didn't know at what level or exactly within what context, and I enjoyed school a lot, and so it was fairly easy for me to continue the trajectory of getting more and more education. Also, education was just very highly prized in my family, so the notion of accumulating as much of it as you could get was a good thing as far as the people that I loved were concerned.
Okay. So, and you've worked in different parts of the country other than Mississippi. When the opportunity came in front of you to be in Parkersburg as the president, I'm sure you did your due diligence and your research and all that, and did a visit and all that. What really attracted you to this opportunity here?
I remember the day that Sam Winans, who was the chair of the Board of Governors at that time, called me to offer me the presidency here. And I remember it as simultaneously the most joyful personal moment of my life and the most humbling moment of my life as well, because I had seen that as the path that I wanted to take for a long time. I had risen through fairly traditional ranks in higher education, and I felt like it was the time for me to move into the presidency, mostly because I would be able to impact what was happening to the next generation of students at a much higher level of influence, and I wanted very much to do that. But I wasn't running away from anything. I was happy where I was. The university where I was very, very kind to me, and so I was running towards something, and it was something very specific. I wanted a place that was rural. I wanted a place that still had a lot of first generation college students. I wanted a place where really the profile of a young Chris Gilmer could still be found in the public schools. And while I ended up buying a house in town in Parkersburg, Parkersburg, I wanted to be able to be close to my more rural roots. I need to be not very far from where I can go out and pick vegetables in the
Right.
garden, or some of the things that I did as a child. And so this felt to me, I went frankly, on two interviews as a finalist, one in a place very different and very far from West Virginia, and the one here. And while the other visit went quite well and the people were absolutely lovely to me, there was just a sort of kinship and a sort of familiarity that I felt immediately with this community, that I felt with the people during the time that I spent with them. So I went home after my interview thinking, okay, I don't know whether these people want me or not, but I know that I want them.
Right.
I know this is where I feel called to be, and I know that's a really strong word, but it's not an overstatement of how I felt, and it's not an overstatement of how I still feel. So I wanted to be able to make a difference, but I wanted to be able to make a difference in a place that felt very much like my home, and that had a lot of common elements with my home. And I thought that would be the case here, and it actually has proven to be.
Yeah, and as a member of the business community, I'm out a lot and talking to different people, and I think you've been very involved in the community as well. I'm sure that was part of your plan.
It was.
And it's always good to involve the community, because this school has been a part of the community. But before you got here, there were some interim people and some short-term people, so maybe it lacks some stability. So I think, speaking from the business community, that we've noticed that there's something different going on out here than was before.
Thank you, Nathan. That's kind of you to say. You can only be as involved in the community as it will allow you to be.
Right.
So I found this to be a very welcoming community. I found it to be hungry, perhaps, for the university to reach out to it and try to strengthen the town-gown relationships. And that is something that I've spent a lot of time and energy on. But I couldn't have done it if the people here at the college weren't willing to support me in it. And I couldn't have done it if the people in the communities that we serve all throughout our service area weren't willing to welcome us in that way. So it has been a big focus of mine, but I think the reason it's been successful is probably less about me and more about how receptive the community was to us.
So, as we said, it's early August 2019. You're a little over a year in. You're a full academic year in. So, I'm sure you've taken at least a few moments to think back on that. What are your thoughts on year one?
Miss Vestal Goodman said it best. I don't know if y'all know Miss Vestal or not, but she's the undisputed queen of Southern gospel music, and she was music that my fairly prim grandmother deemed appropriate for us children to listen to. And she has this song that she always sang. It's probably my very favorite song, and she says, "I wouldn't take nothing for my journey now." And that's how I feel. I would not take anything. As an English major, I'll correct her grammar. I wouldn't take anything for the journey that I find myself on now. It's been everything I expected it to be, and it's even been more and better than I expected it to be. So there's nothing that has taken me really by surprise. There's nothing during this first year that I really wish had been different. I get up every day coming to work here, and it's the happiest I've ever been. So I think that's when you know you're in the right place doing the right thing.
Yeah, when you're not clock watching is what I always say. If you're watching the clock, you need to find something else to do. What I noticed, and I didn't go to school here, I went out of town. I went to a small college and then graduate work at WVUP Morgantown. So a lot of the hallways were very institutional-like.
Yes.
I think it was kind of like that here.
Yes,
but
it was.
Walking around here today, it's a whole different thing. I assume that's part of what your vision was.
Absolutely. I wanted it to be a place where the students felt like was an extension of their home, and the people who work here felt like it was an extension of home. I know words like love and family and things like that are really big words, and sometimes when people speak them, folks wonder if they're being sincere, but you get what you seem to get with me. Those are words that I can speak and words that I can mean. I came here with the idea of trying to bring us together cohesively as a family in service to our students. And so I needed this to be a really happy place to be. And one element of it being a happy place to be is for it to be colorful and vibrant and alive. And it was, I will agree, a bit institutional in the way that it physically presented itself when I came. And there came a day, I guess one day, when I just simply couldn't bear it anymore. And I went over to Michelle Young, who is our senior graphic designer, and I said, we got to put some stuff on the walls. It doesn't even matter to be too much what it is, but I can't bear the starkness of it anymore. So that day, my famed Things on Walls campaign was born, and Michelle kind of led that, and so we decided the best and easiest thing and the most meaningful thing that we could put on the walls are big canvases, which are photographs of us.
Right.
So we put our students and we put our faculty and staff and our alums doing all kinds of their daily activities onto canvases, and we have them all over the walls now. And we've also tried to create little nooks in the building here and there that are just more inviting, with more comfortable chairs and tables and things like that. Little simple things that say to the people who come here, we want you to come and stay.
Right.
And we want you to know that we rolled out the red carpet for you, or the reddest carpet we had. We don't ever have the resources of a private Ivy League liberal arts college. We're not trying to be that, but to the extent that the good people of West Virginia have helped us to be a very, very fiscally solvent place, we decided we would spend a little bit of money and a little bit of energy to bring some life into the place. And I think it's paid off, because everybody that I've talked to, almost everybody who works here, seems to be pleased. And the students are just coming by day after day, one after the other, as they're coming back onto campus for the semester, to start saying how much they like the transformation. So
you have, and we're getting into the think tank a little bit. We're going to touch on it, but
okay.
You have a passion for helping, working with historically underserved students. Where does that come from? And if you want to touch on the think tank a little bit, at least.
Sure. I am a historically underserved student. Society, before I was born, had very low expectations of what Chris Gilmer, or somebody who came from the place that I came from, was going to be or was going to accomplish. I've worked with Rhodes Scholar finalists in my life. I've worked some of the most academically prepared students in the world, and what I learned is they're going to make it anyway. They're going to find a way to make it anyway. So the students that are my true passion are the ones that were like me, that need a little extra help. Maybe nobody in their family knew how to fill out a financial aid application, or even knew that that would be necessary. Maybe nobody realized that there's so many ways that we can help them gain a college education, even if nobody in their family did before. So I define historically underserved very broadly. People think that it's about race and gender, and it most certainly is about those things, but it's about so much more than that. It's about veterans coming back who served our nation and an educational system that really wasn't prepared to help them. It's about first generation students, academically challenged students, students with who learn differently. It's about LGBTQ students, or students of different religions and cultures that weren't a part of the mainstream that higher education was originally constructed to serve. So my passion has been about leveling that playing field over the years. It's not about giving anybody an entitlement program. They have to bring the very best. They have to bring their A game. But my view is if any student brings their A game and they really want to learn, it's our responsibility to put the rest of the things in place that allow them to succeed just as much as someone who came from a socioeconomically privileged background would have. It ought to be a right, not a privilege in the United States to get an education if you're willing to work for it. So equity is a really big passion of mine. And a few years back, I did start the National Institutes for Historically Underserved Students, and we had the last convening of that in November here in Parkersburg, funded with the generosity of our foundation. Nobody's ever paid to come. Educational leaders, philanthropists, civil rights leaders from all across the country come and participate. I think we had 14 states in the District of Columbia last year. We expect even more this year. But we did pay travel costs and things like that for some of the people who couldn't as easily front their own expenses. So that is a group that we continue to grow and diversify and build on. And I think it's going to become a national calling card for WVU Parkersburg, that we're showing up to the national conversation about the promotion of equity for all students. And really, since we live in Appalachia, all of us,
Right.
And Appalachia has been so historically underserved over the years, to some degree, every student that we teach fits into that category, and they need an advocate.
Just an at bat, right? They
Exactly.
just need an opportunity.
That's exactly right.
So let's go back to Mississippi and your
All right.
childhood, and let's talk about the food.
Oh, sure.
Anytime I talk to someone that grew up in the South, there's always a good food story, or
Yes.
it's grandma's whatever or mom's whatever. What's
Yeah.
when you think about back home back in the day, what's that dish that you wanted to see on the table?
Oh my goodness, so many. My grandmother believed that there was that chicken was God's most perfect food, and there was nothing that I think could be done with the chicken that she didn't know how to do. So I learned to cook from my grandmother. So there's very little you can do with a chicken that I don't know how to do with some degree of proficiency. My mother, who was so instrumental in my life in so many ways, didn't really enjoy the domestic aspects of life too much. She was more of a career-oriented person, and I say that with reverence and respect, but she loved to tell a story, and she said that I learned to cook by self-defense at a very early age because it wasn't something that she enjoyed doing, and I always marveled at it. My grandmother, I don't guess, owned a measuring spoon or a measuring cup. You would have to watch her 10 times to see how she did things, and then you wouldn't know how to do it yourself. A fistful of flour would be one of the measurements that she used, a fistful. Well, how big is your hand? Then is the question that we begin to ask. But, chicken and dumplings would be a huge favorite of mine. I make homemade dumplings from scratch and boil them in a rich chicken broth, and that's just like my comfort food.
Right.
And anytime my grandmother would serve a meal, which was every day, she would serve a dessert of some kind. And it might be something real simple, like a fruit cobbler, which is basically a pie with dumplings. I guess it's all revolving around dumplings, this story. A pie without a crust. And so she would do them in blackberry and apple and peach and everything that you could possibly think of. So those kinds of things are important. And then the holidays were basically defined by food, where I come from. Things that you didn't get every day, that you got on special occasions, like fresh apple cake with butterscotch icing that was, a foot high, and things like that she had worked on for 3 days in different stages of completion. So I do consider myself a very good Southern cook of, I guess, what people kind of say in slang is soul food. Our philosophy of cooking when I was growing up was more butter by definition makes something better. So all the things that people tell us aren't good for us anymore are the things that I'm pretty good at preparing.
Yeah, I love to cook. To me, it's actually relaxing to me.
Me too.
It seems hectic to some people,
Yeah.
but three things on the stove, something in the oven,
Oh,
something
yeah.
that's balance. I don't know. It's just relaxing to me. Plus, I like to eat. So
Me too. You know, for years and years, I did the holiday meals, all of them for my family. And, you know, I can get a Thanksgiving dinner for 20 with 14 courses, all coming off at the same time and on the table. And there's nothing really that brings me greater joy than doing that. So usually when I go home for a holiday, my little nieces, they're not little anymore, they're practically grown women, some of them are grown women now, will start sending me their special requests a couple of weeks in advance. We want to be sure that we're going to have the macaroni and cheese, or, you know, another one likes banana pudding. We want to be sure that we're going to get the banana pudding this year. So.
So leadership is also another passion of yours. Yeah. Obviously, you've spent a lot of time in those roles. You travel around and speak on the topic.
I do.
Who would be, or maybe it's by committee, a mentor to you as far as leadership or even educational leadership?
Sure. Well, I've had so many. I've been richly blessed in that regard. But I'll mention two. Dr. Donzel Lee, who has just retired as president of Alcorn State University, the university that I served before I came here, told me once upon a time one of the best pieces of advice I've ever had, I think. He said, Chris, as you grow in leadership, don't let one person form your opinion of someone else. Right. You know, meet everyone else with everyone with an open expectation, and don't let what someone's already told you about them influence too much the formation of your own opinion. And I have found that to be a very valuable piece of advice. And then Dr. Aubrey K. Lucas, who is the president emeritus of the University of Southern Mississippi and was the president there many years ago when I was an undergraduate, but still very active as president emeritus, and who has been so kind to be a mentor to me since I first met him in 1985. Told me when he started kind of helping to groom me for the presidency that we hoped would come. He said, Chris, the presidency of an institution really is a position that is given a lot of power. Here's what I want to say to you about power. A worthy leader knows when to use it and when not to use it. And more times than not, you should not use the power that you are given. And these are things that I have found to be, you know, so useful. What I talk about when I lecture, or I don't really ever lecture, but when I tell stories about leadership at conferences and things like that, it's what I call authentic leadership. And what that means is you don't need to be me, and I don't need to be you, and I don't need to try to be Dr. Lucas or Dr. Lee, because I can't. I would fall short of that goal, even though it would be a worthy goal. I just need to be honestly what I am and lead with what I have. We're all endowed with different skills. We're all endowed with certain things that we're really good at, certain things we're not as good at. A leader needs to know what she or he is really good at, and then surround himself or herself with the people who bring the complementary pieces, so that everything that is needed is on the table. So I say, if you are a detail-oriented leader, don't try to be the big picture person as your main thing. And if you're a big picture person, understand the importance of details, but surround yourself with people who are going to help you with that. So I really don't believe that there's one right and all other wrong models of leadership. I believe leadership can be cultivated in any person who's willing to truly know and recognize his or her gifts, and has the humility to bring the other gifts to the party.
So I came to understand recently that there was some sort of Tammy Wynette story.
Oh my goodness, Miss Tammy Wynette. Oh yes. I have, you know, if I had a playlist, which I don't because I'm not very technological, people have to help me with many things related to computers and telephones and all of those things. But it would be the Queens of Country with some Southern gospel thrown in if I had a playlist. And in my view, Miss Tammy is the undisputed queen of country music, with all respect to Patsy and Loretta and Dolly and all the others. So I was traveling probably 25 years ago, I imagine, on a flight from England back to the United States. And it turns out Tammy Wynette had been touring Europe. So Tammy Wynette was on the plane with her band. Of course, her band was back in coach where I was, but the Queen was up in first class. So all the way across the Atlantic, I tried to contrive of how it was that I was going to get to meet Tammy Wynette. And this wonderful thing that we used to do called customs helped me so much. We had to go through customs in the Cincinnati airport. And so there, like, two people in line ahead of me is Tammy Wynette going through customs, and she's got on blue jeans and a t-shirt and very casually dressed with a full-length mink coat over that. So I just decided this is my one moment in time. You know, it's either going to be now or never. And she went over while her people were putting all her bags and all of those things and sat down, quite exhausted, and I'm quite sure wishing that she could, for once in her life, be left alone.
Right.
But a little kid from rural Mississippi who had grown up listening to her and George his whole life went over and sat down beside her and said, "Oh, Miss Wynette, you know, I am quite possibly your biggest fan in the whole world. You know, can I just sit here with you and just bask in your glory, you know, for a few minutes until you have to get up and go somewhere else?" And she looked down at me and she said, "Yes, darling, by all means, you know, come here and sit with me, you know, and call me Tammy." And she gave me her autograph, and we probably spent about 15 minutes visiting. And she had done that probably 10,000 times with other fans over the years. But it was a real moment for a little kid from Scott County, Mississippi, to whom she had been this mythological creature for her whole life.
So, and you started a blog that is called Conversations with Chris.
That's right.
And, of course, that fits in with a little bit of your journalism and English background,
It
so
does.
I'm sure you enjoy it.
I do.
So tell me a bit about it and where we can find it.
Where you can find it is on our website, which is WVUP.edu, and if you go to the tab, I think there's a tab that says President or something like that. Again, I'm confessing my lack of proficiency with technology. It's fairly easy for you to find, linked to the President's office. And, you know, recently I posted about going back to Mississippi and posted a picture of me standing in front of the Damascus Primitive Baptist Church, and I just chat about whatever's on my mind and invite people to come in and chat with me about it. I want to know people's dreams. I want to know people's hopes for this place, which I am only the steward of for this moment, you know, and I want to leave it one day, hopefully a long time from now, better than I found it. So I want to hear the dreams of what people would be liking us to try to do in service to our community. So it's just now starting to catch on. I haven't been doing it for very long. And so I enjoy writing the blogs, and then I enjoy seeing comments and other people coming on. I did it earlier in the year on a Facebook page that they set up for me, which didn't go very well because I could write the things, but I didn't have enough sense to figure out how to post them and regulate all of them. So now all I have to do is just write my little blog, and I send it over to PR, and they push a magic button and post it for me. So it's just one example of how I'm trying to have conversations. I've really tried to make my office pretty much an open door, and people take me up on that from the community inside the college and from the communities we serve, and just come and hang out with me, and it's really the way I learn about what we're doing well and what we could do better.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a fair statement because I don't have a ton of experience being around higher ed administrators, but You seem unlike most higher ed administrators.
That's probably true.
You spend a lot of time with these people, so you might know that. But just with the open door thing, or putting yourself out there with the blog and kind of being accessible. I remember when I went to undergrad, you never saw the president of the university. And if you did, you looked the other way.
Yeah.
And he just looked.
Hope they didn't notice.
Yeah, he just kind of looked mad all the time, and his office was in a very nice building, but it was with I don't remember, nothing student oriented. So a student would never go in that building.
Yeah.
There were other administrative offices there. Where your situation here is, you're right by the front door. It's probably very unlike most higher ed.
I think that probably is, and it's just how I would want it to be. You know, my mama has said many important things to me in my life, but one that always stuck with me is, son, you're as good as anybody and better than absolutely nobody. And you can't ask people or expect people to do things that you're not willing to do yourself. So, you know, lots of times people come in and they'll see me dust in my office, and sometimes people say, don't we have people to do that for you? And I say, I don't ever want to become the person that's too good to dust my own office. You know, I can't imagine anybody wanting to become that person. So I just really enjoy, I've always been an extrovert, so I enjoy the getting to see as many different people as I can, hear what's on their mind, and it really informs the decisions that
keeping a good pulse on
it informs the decisions that I make. So I believe in truth in advertising too. What you see really is what you get with me, and I told that to the board when they were trying to hire me, and I went home, and I can be a big personality sometimes, and I'm very willing to admit that. So I had been told when I left home, they said, now give them about 80%. You know, 80% is plenty, you know. And so I went home, and they said, what'd you do? I said, I gave them 100%. Full on 100%. They said, Lord have mercy, that means you probably sang to them, and you told them the stories about, you know, Mama and them and all of that. I said, you know what I did? Because I felt it was important for them to know what they were signing on for. So that a different person than they thought they met didn't show up to be their president. And I guess they must have decided that was okay, because they invited me back.
Yeah. So one final question.
Sure.
You spent some time teaching at the college level. So you have former students running around out there that have gone and done amazing things in their lives. When you run into them years later, what do you think's the greatest compliment as an educator that you can get?
Well, you know, I'm actually a professor of humanities here at the college as well. I taught one class last semester because I really think it's important to maintain some ties to the classroom. And students always used to ask me from 20 years ago, will you remember me if I see you in 20 years or 25 years? And here's what I always said: probably not, if only I taught you something. But if you teach me something, I will definitely remember you. And so many of my students have taught me things over the years that I end up remembering more of them than I forgot. And quick story, when I was teaching at a historically black college in Mississippi, I had a student named Rodney was his name, and Rodney would come in. It was my first year of teaching. I was very green, and would come in and read the newspaper every day in class while I was giving my lectures or whatever I was doing. Didn't disrupt class in any way, just sat there and read the newspaper. Obviously not interested, you know. And after a couple of weeks passed, I would ask more experienced colleagues what I ought to do about this, and they said, well, you've got to shut it down. You know, you've got to be an authority figure in your own classroom. But somehow that didn't feel right to me. So I let it go on a little bit further. And then one day, a month or 6 weeks in, Rodney came in with no newspaper. And he started paying attention, and he started engaging in what was happening in class. And after class one day, Rodney came back by to me, and he said, "Dr. Gilmer, can I tell you something?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "I'm going to just be honest with you. To start with, you were an old white guy who was trying to teach me British literature about people who have been dead for several hundred years. As a young African American man, I found it hard to imagine that you really had that much to say to me. Mm-hmm. You know, you were my white teacher," he said. "Today, you're just my teacher." And I think that's the nicest thing that a student ever said to me. We take away labels when we earn trust and when we find bridges that we can all cross, to focus maybe a little bit less on the ways that we're different and a little bit more on the ways that we're all alike. So I'm still in touch with students I taught 20 and 25 years ago. One of them gave the commencement address here back in December, and I'm so proud of them. I'm like a proud papa for all the things that they accomplish. And though it sounds like a tired cliche, I really feel like a daddy, or I'm sad to say trending toward a granddaddy of all the students that we have here at WVU Parkersburg as well.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me. We'll have to do this again. There's so much more to talk about, but I appreciate the time.
I really enjoyed it, Nathan. Thanks for doing this for our community. I look forward to hearing your conversations with other folks.
Thanks.
You're welcome.